Chapter 9: Being Palestine, Becoming Palestine Rediscovery and New Representations of Modern Palestine and Their Impact on Palestinian National Identity. We have on this earth what makes life worth living, the aroma of bread at dawn, a woman's opinion of men, the works of Aeschylus, the beginnings of love, grass on a stone, mothers who live on a flute sigh, and the invader's fear of memories. We have on this earth what makes life worth living on this earth. The Lady of Earth, the mother of all beginnings, the mother of all endings. She was called Palestine, she came to be called Palestine. O Lady, both you are my lady, I am worthy of life. Mahmoud Darwish, On This Earth 1. New Representations of Palestine, 1805–1917. For over 2 millennia, Palestine has been the destination of the three monotheisms. While some of these men and women offered sacrifices, collected relics, and prayed, others studied fort, preached, excavated or conquered. A rich granary in the Fertile Crescent, no land has been as much the focus of religious tourism and piety, pilgrimage and colonization as Palestine. Motto 2013, 913. Modern European travelers, pilgrims, writers, cartographers, geographers, biblical Orientalists and romance seekers had no historical, geographic or archaeological evidence or good reason to refer to modern Palestine as a Canaan. They logically reproduced ancient maps of Palestina, maps derived from more than a millennium and a half of classical antiquity and Byzantine Christianity. They also relied on the Hellenistic, Roman, early Christian, Byzantine and Arab Islamic toponymic memory and heritage of the country. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European Romantic Orientalist and a biblical geography of Palestine increased phenomenally, and voluminous publications on the historical geography of Palestine began to appear not only in Latin but in vernacular European languages. This included the works of Hadrianus Rolandus, 1676–1718, a prominent Dutch Orientalist, cartographer and philologist who made a lasting contribution to research on the scriptural geography of Palestine, Pilin 1984, 212. His work was mainly philological in character and included Antiquitates Sacrae Veterum Hebreorum, 1708, and Palestiner ex Monumentus Veteris Illustrator, 1714, written in Latin, in which he sought to describe the geography of a biblical Palestine. Western Travelogues of Palestine, the distinction between Palestine, Holy Land and Syria. For many decades in the 18th century, the Galilee-based autonomous regime of Dar al-Umar, with its increased trade links with France and Britain in particular, effectively linked the Galilee with the entire Palestinian coast from Lebanon to Gaza. It is not surprising, therefore, that throughout the 19th century the combined effect of European travelogues, travels in Palestine, guidebooks, religious treatises, novels, pilgrims' accounts and maps made a clear distinction between Palestine and Assyria, and treated historic Palestine, Holy Land for all practical purposes, as a separate country. Moreover, throughout the 19th century for European and Russian travelers and pilgrims, Palestine and the Holy Land were synonymous and interchangeable. This synonymy did not include Syria, which made Palestine sharply distinct from Syria to the north. In the 19th century, religious revivalism, combined with feverish messianic nationalism, back to the Bible movements, and a rediscovery of Palestine, swept across Europe and Russia. Moreover, in European and Russian Orientalisms of the 19th century, Palestine and their Holy Land, Terra Sancta, the land of Jesus, were interchangeable. This religio-political perception of Palestine, steeped in the stories of the New Testament, made Palestine, the Holy Land, seem sharply distinct from Syria and Lebanon, and made the Galilee, the birthplace of Jesus and the scene of many of the stories of the New Testament, inherently and closely linked with Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, Jaffa and Gaza, more than its traditionally close links under Islam with the vast Al-Sham region. The popularization of the concept of Palestine was illustrated by the mountains of geographical literature on Palestine listed in the 1890 Bibliotheca Geographica Palestini by Gustav Reinhold Rohricht, a German historian of the Crusades. Rohricht provided a census of 3,515 print and manuscript accounts dedicated to Palestine literature between 333 AD and 1878 AD. The work also had a chronological list of maps relating to Palestine. Rohricht's survey of Palestine literature and publications shows the following: A. 333 to 1300 AD, 177 works, b. 14th century, 97, c. 15th century with the invention of the printing press, 279, d. 16th century, 333, e. 17th century, 390, f. 18th century, 318, g. 19th century, until 1878, with the replacement of the hand-operated Tenberg-style presses by steam-powered presses which allowed printing on an industrial scale. 1915 works. Shalev 2012, 79. However, this remarkable survey was far from being exhaustive. Western travelogues of Palestine in the 18th and 19th centuries included thousands of books, articles and other materials detailing accounts of the journeys of European, Russian and North American travelers to the Holy Land. Fueled by modern capitalism, new printing technologies and new transport means, many of the travelogues on Palestine treated the country not so much as a land of living histories and shared memories of ordinary people but more of a memorial to Western Christianity, a Christianity in search of a new identity in the midst of the raging struggle between scientific rationalism and skepticism, on the one hand, and literalist evangelist fundamentalism, on the other. Typically, a Church of England journal, the Church Quarterly Review of 1891, described Roericht's book as indispensable to students of Palestinian geography. Roericht's survey of Palestine literature is most revealing with regard to two particular periods, the Renaissance period and the 19th century. These two periods experienced two major European technological revolutions with considerable impact on the Palestine literature. First, the Renaissance printing revolution press from the late 15th century introduced the era of mass circulation of publications, and second, in the 19th century the replacement of the hand-operated Tenberg-style press by the steam-powered press allowed printing and publication on an industrial scale. This unprecedented industrial scale of production, circulation and consumption of Palestine, Holy Land knowledge was aided by the photographic revolution of the 1830s, which began to produce masses of images of the Holy Land for the European, American and Russian markets. A few examples of the large amounts of Palestine literature, including geographic publications on and travels in Palestine in the 19th century, in several key European languages, include Jean-Louis Burckhardt's Travels in Syria and the Holy Land, 1822, Thomas Wright's Early Travels in Palestine, 1848, which consists of accounts of the early pilgrims to Palestine, and Leslie Porter's A Handbook for Travelers in Syria and Palestine, including an account of the geography, history, antiquities, inhabitants of these countries, Part 1 and 2, 1858, 1868, Vital Quinet, Syrie, Liban, Palestine, Geography Administrative, Statistique, Descriptive et Raisonné, 1896, Titus Tobler's Drittwanderung nach Palästina, 1859, and Bibliographia Geographica Palestini, 1867. John Murray, one of the most important and influential publishers in Britain, produced Porter's A Handbook for Travelers in Syria and Palestine, which treats Palestine as a separate country. This book describes Palestine in three major sections: Part 1, Palestine Jerusalem, and Southern Palestine, which includes cities from Gaza to Jaffa, and Part 2 with two sections, A, Northern Palestine, which included the Galilee and Damascus, and B, Northern Syria. In a similar vein, Joseph Means' Geography of Palestine, Historical and Descriptive, 1865, and Walter MacLeod's The Geography of Palestine, or the Holy Land, including Phoenicia and Philistia, 1856, were typical of the large number of books on the historical geography of Palestine published in Britain and Europe in the middle of the 19th century. These historical geographic publications treated Palestine as a distinct country and a geopolitical unit separate from Syria, Egypt and Arabia. It is also worth pointing out that the expression Southern Syria, which appeared briefly in the early 20th century, was never mentioned in these publications. Crucially, in the second half of the 19th century, translations of articles and books into Arabic began to distinguish clearly between Syria and Palestine. For instance, in 1883 George Edward Post's article Plants of Syria and Palestine was published in the Arabic journal Al-Muqtatav, 1883, which was founded in 1876 at the Syrian Protestant College, today the American University of Beirut, before moving to Cairo in 1884. The same distinction is also found in the Arabic version of Post's Nabat Surya wa Filastin wa al-Qtr al-Misri wa Bawardaha, Flora of Syria and Palestine and Sinai, a handbook of the flowering plants and ferns native and naturalized from the Taurus to Ras Muhammad and from the Mediterranean Sea to the Syrian desert, 1896. An indication that by the 1880s European publications on Palestine geography and their translations into Arabic were beginning to have an impact on modern Arab perceptions of Palestine, Foster 2013, and the evolving notion that Palestine was a distinct geopolitical unit. The work of Guy Lestrange, a scholar of Arabic and Persian at Cambridge University, on the historical geography of Palestine under Islam in the Middle Ages, added another dimension to British preoccupation with Palestine in the second half of the 19th century. Guy Lestrange's Palestine under the Muslims, a description of Syria and the Holy Land from AD 650 to 1500, translated from the works of the medieval Arab geographers, was published in London by the Committee of the Palestine Exploration Fund (PEF) in 1890. The PEF, founded in 1865, had already focused on Palestine, the Holy Land. Other antecedents to the PEF also focused on Palestine, the Holy Land, and made a clear distinction between Palestine and Syria. This included the Evangelical British Palestine Association, established 60 years before the PEF. The formation of the Palestine Association in the early 19th century had been spurred by the Napoleonic Wars and the 1798-1801 French invasion and campaign in Egypt and Palestine. Napoleon's defeat at Acre in 1799 is one of the best-known episodes of modern world history. The collapse of his siege of Acre, the city known in Europe as the last capital of the Latin Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, in 1799, with the full support of British maritime power, ushered in a new era in British direct involvement in the region and the beginnings of British religio-political distinction between Palestine and Syria. This became evident in a long romantic evangelical poem from 1803, Palestine, which was composed by a clergyman, Reginald Heber, later known as Bishop of Calcutta, with the help of Sir Walter Scott. The popular poem was recited in London theatres and was later published and set to music by the composer William Crotch, a professor of music at Oxford University. The increasing British evangelical involvement in Palestine also became evident in the renaming of the Palestine Association, which was established in 1805 shortly after the departure of the French from the region. This society had initially been founded in March 1805 under the name Syrian Society. A month later, on the 24th of April 1805, its founders decided that the Syrian Society shall henceforth be denominated the Palestine Association. The Palestine Association was co-founded and led by William Richard Hamilton, 1777 to 1859, a British diplomat, traveller, antiquarian and Egyptologist who later served as Under-Secretary for Foreign Affairs. The association was formally disbanded in 1834 and incorporated into the Royal Geographical Society, Soberman 1982, Cork and Goran 2011. Lestrange's Palestine under the Muslims, 1890, 2010, 2014, placed the image of the Dome of the Rock on its cover and contained maps and illustrations. His work, which introduces the mass of information which lies buried in the Arabic texts of the Muslim geographers and travelers of the Middle Ages, Lestrange 1890, preface, provided vivid descriptions of Jund Falastin under Islam on the basis of the accounts of the 10th century Palestinian Jerusalemite historian and geographer Ul-Makdisi and his work, Asan ul-Tarkasim fi Marifat ul-Akarlim, The Best Divisions for Knowledge of the Regions, Ul-Makdisi 1994, 2002. Lestrange had already translated from Arabic into English and published in 1886 Ul-Makdisi's famous work under the title Ul-Muqaddas's Description of Syria and Palestine, and this title by Lestrange also underlines the sharp geopolitical distinction between Palestine and Syria in European thinking in the 19th century. The clear distinction between Palestine, the Holy Land, on the one hand, and Syria ul-Sham, on the other, was not exclusively European, as we have already seen. In the 17th century, Palestinian Muslim author Saleh ibn Ahmad al-Matashi made that distinction in his work The Complete Knowledge in Remembering the Holy Land and its Boundaries and Remembering Palestine and its Boundaries and Al-Sham, 1695–1696. Also, successive generations of medieval and modern Christian pilgrims referred to geographical subdivision of Palestine, Syria and Arabia. 4. Educated local Palestinians, familiar with both classical Arab Islamic writings on Palestine and Al-Sham and European publications on Palestine, and for ordinary Palestinians observing the caravans of European and Russian pilgrims at close quarters. This distinction between Palestine, the Holy Land and Syria would be taken for granted. Western-funded, Roman Catholic terra sancta schools based in the urban centers of Palestine where most Palestinian Christians resided began to appear in Nazareth, Jaffa, Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and for Palestinians educated in the European and Russian schools at home or abroad, the production of the European knowledge on the historical geography of Palestine, the Holy Land, as well as the mushrooming of European consulates in Palestine, would also be a matter of great interest and some concern. From the mid-19th century, with the improvement of communication and establishment of several European consulates in Palestine, their grand tour of the 18th century, their traditional trip undertaken by mainly upper-class European young men of means through Italian cities, was replaced by their Cook tour, organized by Thomas Cook. Middle-class early mass tourism and travels in Greece, Palestine and Egypt. Thomas Cook arranged for the German Kaiser Wilhelm II to visit Palestine in 1898. Their Cook's Tour and Thomas Cook Holy Land tourism also spawned numerous publications in many European languages on their geography of Palestine and the Holy Land, many of which were also accessible to members of the educated Palestinian elite and Ottoman officials. On a popular level, European mass tourism in Palestine impacted on the Palestinian vernacular and, over time, introduced many French and Italian words into Palestinian Arabic words such as hotel, hôtel, chauffeur, douche, beaten, baton, mode, motor, canapé, canabai, salon, balcon, balcone, billet, bolet, pharmacier, pharmacière, souvenir, ascenseur, ascensel, dossier, dossier, automobile, benziner, benzin, and garage, garage, still commonly in use today. In the 19th century and early 20th century, much of the European knowledge production on Palestine in books and travel diaries remained dominated by biblical studies, scriptural geography, Orientalism, in which the Palestinian Arabs were portrayed as a simple appendix to the ancient biblical landscape, as shadows of the far-off past, fossils suspended in time. Camel 2014, 2015. While the Arab Falahin, peasants of modern Palestine, were viewed as symbols of their biblical Jews. Gill, E. 2006. However, as early as the mid-19th century, biblical archaeologist and scriptural geographer Edward Robinson, 1794–1863, writing in the early 1860s when travel by Europeans to the Levant became widespread, notes Palestine, or Palestina, now the most common name for the Holy Land. Robinson, E. 1865, 15. See also Robinson 1841 and Robinson et al. 1860. This observation is also evident from Victor Guérin's 7-volume Description géographique, historique et archéologique de l'art Palestine, 1868–1880. Also Guérin 1881–1883. In the 1860s, the British had set up the Palestine Exploration Fund, which sponsored the survey of Western Palestine and mounted geographical map-making expeditions in Palestine. The PEF was a typical example of their learned societies founded in Britain and was responsible for processing the empire's notions and theories into pseudo-scientific Orientalist thinking and argumentation, leading to the shaping of British policy and intentionality, which finds its apotheosis in the Balfour Declaration of the 2nd of November 1917. One of the main political motives of the PEF was clear from its own publication, names and places in their Old and New Testament and Apocrypha with their modern identifications. Palestine Exploration Fund 1889. The Palestine Exploration Fund listed more than 1150 place names related to the Old Testament and 162 related to the New Testament. British rule in Palestine formally began on the 11th December 1917 when General Allenby officially entered the Old City of Jerusalem. Shortly after the British military occupation of Palestine, the British authorities set out to gather toponymic information from the local Palestinian inhabitants. The European preoccupation with the biblical place names and with Jerusalem, and the European and American growth of Bible studies had some impact on official Ottoman thinking and on the writings of some Palestinian nationalist authors. The latter sought to construct a counter-Zionist discourse by couching modern Palestinian nationalism in primordialist terms, rooted in Canaanite roots and their land of Canaan. See, for instance, Captain 1969. 3-4. Palestine-focused Russian Orientalism in the late Ottoman period. Branch from Palestine. Tell me the Palestine branch, where you grew up, where are you blooming, what kind of hills, some valleys your decoration was. You were the pure waters of the Jordan, east beam caressed you, night is the wind in the mountains of Lebanon. You stand, the branch of Jerusalem, shrine of the correct time, transparent dusk beam lamps, and the Ark of the Cross, the symbol of the holy. Mikhail Yurevich Lermontov 1837. 2. Palm Sunday is a Christian feast before Easter which commemorates Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. The 1837 poem Vecher Palestini, The Palm Branch of Palestine, by Mikhail Yurevich Lermontov, 1814–1841, a highly influential Russian Romantic poet, also called the poet of the Caucasus and the most important figure of Russian poetry after Alexander Pushkin's death in 1837, encapsulated Russian Orientalism and late Ottoman Palestine. With strong echoes of European Romanticism, 1800–1850, the 1803 Romantic poem by Reginald Heber, Lermontov's Romantic evangelical poem, evokes the stories both of the Gospels and of Russian pilgrimage to Palestine in the 19th century, 3/4 of which pilgrimage took place at Easter, Hummel and Hummel 1995. This evangelizing poetry was inspired by the religious imagination of the country the poet called Palestine, although Lermontov had never visited it. Malo. 2013. In the 19th century, Russian Orientalist Orthodox representations of Palestine went hand in hand. Crucially, Russian writings on, and political activities in the country had a major impact on the perception, conception and actual events of late Ottoman Palestine. Earlier in 1820, Dmitry Darkov, a diplomat and the second counselor of the Russian embassy in Istanbul, was the first Russian writer who went to Palestine as a pilgrim. He also wrote an essay entitled On His Travels, Malo 2013. In fact, many of the Russian historical and literary representations of Palestine in the 19th century were actual descriptions and narrations of Russian pilgrims. Hopwood 1969, 10. Malo 20133. In 1848, Nikolai Gogol, 1809–1852, the leading figure of Russian literary realism, went on a pilgrimage to Palestine. The Romantic Orientalist representations of Palestine by Lermontov and other Russian romantics of the 19th century also harked back to the history of early Christianity and of Palestine under the Byzantines, a period in which, as we have seen in Chapter 4, the Palestine Orthodox Church became self-governing and emerged as one of the top 5 churches governing Christendom. Lermontov's poem had also anticipated Russia's significantly increasing presence in Palestine, which began in 1844 with the arrival of the first Russian Orthodox archimandrite in Palestine. Also in the 1840s, the Russians obtained permission to build a huge compound in Jerusalem. This was constructed after the Crimean War in 1860–1864. Russian efforts culminated in the founding of the Russian Orthodox Palestine Society in St. Petersburg in 1882. In 1889, the word imperial was added to the name and the society became known as the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society. Russian, Turkish, Russian-Paratorliu Orthodox Filistin Semiyeti, Arabic, Hopwood 1969, 150–154, and to the Palestinian Orthodox community in Arabic as the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society. Spurred by the establishment of the British Palestine Exploration Fund in 1865 and its imperial, quasi-military, scientific expeditions to Palestine in the 1870s, see below, The Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society was founded by politician and writer Vasily Nikolaevich Petrovo, 1834–1903, author of Palestiner I Scener, 2011, and chaired by the Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, who had visited Palestine in 1881. The Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society was a scholarly, educational and social organization. In addition to promoting and organizing Russian pilgrimage to the Holy Land, it built schools and hospitals in Palestine and acted as a public body defending Russian interests. Stavro, 1961. The society published its own research in 2 journals, Subshenier Imperatorskovo Pravoslavnovo Palestinskovo Obshestvo, Imperial Orthodox Palestinian Society Reports, and the Palestinsky Spornik, Palestinian Collections. It also established a translation and publishing house in Jerusalem, partly in support of its extensive Arabic language schools and secular teacher training seminaries in late Ottoman Palestine, the first of their kind in modern Palestine. These pioneering teacher training colleges paved the way for modern secular higher education in Palestine, and for the Arab College, also known as the Government Arab College, a Jerusalem-based university college which existed throughout the mandatory period from 1918 until 1948. Following the 1905 Russian Revolution, there was some decline in their budgets of the Imperial Orthodox Palestinian Society. After the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917, the society was renamed the Russian Palestine Society, Russian, Arabic, and was attached to the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. During the mandatory period, severe restrictions were imposed on the activities of the society in Palestine by the British, and after 1948 Israel confiscated much of its land and property. However, the original 19th century name of the society, Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society, was restored in 1992 following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991 and the creation of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, today the society operates and runs projects in Palestine under its original Palestinian Arabic name coined in the late 19th century, the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society. The coat of arms of the Russian Empire, with its double-headed eagle, was formerly associated with the Byzantine Empire. The rulers of Russia had long held themselves to be the main protectors of Christian orthodoxy, especially after most of the membership of the Greek Orthodox churches from 1460 until Greek rebellion of 1821 fell under the control of the Ottomans. In the 19th century, Imperial Russia continued to view itself as their third Rome and the successor to the Byzantine Empire. It continued to pose a serious geopolitical threat to the Ottoman state. The latter sought alliances with other European powers, notably the British and French, to keep Russian ambitions in check. This led to the Crimean War of 1853–1856, whose immediate cause involved the European competition over Jerusalem and the rights of Orthodox Christian minorities in Palestine. The Orthodox Christians were the largest group among the Christian Palestinians. The Russians not only saw themselves as heirs to Orthodox Christianity and the Byzantine Empire in the East and protectors of the Orthodox community in Palestine, they were also concerned about the sharp decline in the proportion of the Orthodox among Palestinian Christians from 90% in 1840 to about 2/3 in 1880 as a result of the proselyting activities of the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches. In the second half of the 19th century, Russia, competing for influence in Palestine with other European powers, took practical steps aimed at consolidating the Russian presence. The Russian consulate was established in Jerusalem in 1858. This was followed by the setting up of the Committee for Palestine, 1858–1864, a body supported by the Russian Foreign Ministry, and in 1860 the Russian Palestine Society, RPS, was also founded. The RPS guided Russian pilgrims to Palestine, bought property and built hospices, churches and schools in Jerusalem and Nazareth. This led to the establishment of a Russian colony compound in Jerusalem in the 1860s. In 1864, the Committee for Palestine was created in the Department for Asia of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 1864–1889, Malo 2013. In 1890, the Imperial Russian government supported and approved the establishment of Hovevei Zion, a registered Russian charity officially known as the Society for the Support of Jewish Farmers and Artisans in Syria and Palestine, subsidized by the Russian government and passing through Jaffa. By 1910, about 8,000 Russian, predominantly peasant, pilgrims visited Palestine every year. And by the First World War the average annual number rose to about 14,000. Organized by the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society, this influx of Russian pilgrims had an impact on Ottoman administrative reorganization of Palestine in the early 20th century. Russian writings on, and mass pilgrimage to, late Ottoman Palestine were very important for a variety of political reasons and had intended and unintended consequences. Russian writings on Palestine inspired early Zionist colonial settlers, Hovevei Zion, lovers of Zion, who began to arrive from the territories of the Russian Empire in the 1880s. In 1890, the establishment of Hovevei Zion as a registered Russian charity was officially approved by the Imperial Russian government as the Society for the Support of Jewish Farmers and Artisans in Syria and Palestine, which came to be popularly known among Zionist settlers as the Odessa Committee. Arabic and French were the two key languages of the educated classes of late 19th century Palestine, and the Russian society soon came to be known as Société pour le soutien des agriculteurs et les artisans juifs en Syrie et en Palestine. It was dedicated to the practical aspects of establishing agricultural colonies, and its projects included help in the founding of the early Zionist colonies, Moshavot, of Rehovot and Hadira. The Russian Zionists dominated the World Zionist Organization created by Theodor Herzl in the late 19th century. 5. The ambitions of the Russian Empire posed the greatest threat to the Ottoman Empire throughout much of the 19th century. As we shall see below, the clergy of the Russian Orthodox Church in Palestine, although technically in communion with the Greek-dominated Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, openly championed the local Palestinian Arab Orthodox community. Backed by the Russian authorities, the social and educational activities of the Russian Orthodox Church in Palestine, and, more crucially, the Russian Orthodox Palestine Society founded in 1882 after 1889, known to Palestinians as the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society, see below, attracted sympathy from local Palestinian Orthodox Christians as it championed the radical idea that local Arab clergy should have cultural autonomy and should be promoted to be bishops and leaders of their Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, instead of the latter importing senior clergy from Greece. 6. In late Ottoman Palestine, this idea had a galvanizing effect on educated local Palestinian Orthodox Christians, many of whom were to become leading cultural figures and in the forefront of the Palestinian nationalist struggle. The flourishing cultural and public spaces of late Ottoman Jerusalem and the reimagining of Palestinian territorial identity and growth of territorial patriotism and proto-nationalism, promoted by Palestinian Orthodox Arab intellectuals such Khalil Beidas in the late 19th century, see below, encouraged Palestinian Arab Orthodox journalists Isser ul-Isser, 1878-1950, and his cousin Youssef Hanar ul-Isser to set up the daily newspaper Palestine, in Jaffa in January 1911. With its distinctly vernacular name, it was based on modern perceptions of Palestine. In late Ottoman Palestine, the construction of a two-tier, Palestinian Arab Ottoman, identity based on Ottoman citizenship and equality for all inhabitants was attempted. As we shall see, the newspaper Palestine, 1911-1967, would also become not only one of the most influential voices of modern indigenous Palestinian national identity, it would also fiercely oppose Zionist settler colonization. For decades, Palestine would remain dedicated to the cause of Palestine, to Palestinian territorial nationalism and pan-Arab solidarity, and to the Arab Orthodox community in its struggle with the Greek-dominated Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Strategic ambitions and the British Peaceful Crusade, science, empire and the mapping of Palestine by the Palestine Exploration Fund, 1865 to 1877. We have there in Palestine a land teeming with fertility and rich in history, but almost without an inhabitant, a country without a people, and look, scattered over the world, a people without a country. Lord Shaftesbury, chairman of the Palestine Exploration Fund, Quarterly Statement for 1875, London, 1875, page 116. Central to the Victorian, peaceful, Crusader revivalism of the 19th century and the successful opening of their Holy Land to Europe's geopolitical and cultural religious penetration was the British Palestine Exploration Fund and Ordnance Survey of Western Palestine between 1871 and 1877. British scientific and technological advances in cartography and cadastral mapping were fully harnessed for empire and imperial expansionism in the Middle East. Ordnance Survey (OS) is the national mapping agency of Britain and is one of the largest producers of maps in the world. The British official agency's name indicates its original military and strategic purposes, and its origins go back to the mapping of Scotland in the aftermath of the Jacobite uprising of 1745 and the absence of military maps and detailed knowledge of the Scottish Highlands. The British were not the first to conduct instrumental strategic mapping of Palestine. The first modern maps of Palestine, based on an instrumental survey and using the most developed scientific instruments of the time, had already been produced by Colonel Pierre Jaquetin, a French mapmaker and director of the French Survey Military Corps during Napoleon's expedition in Egypt and Palestine, who in 1799, on Napoleon's orders, prepared dozens of secret maps of Egypt, Sinai and Palestine. 6 of those maps show parts of Palestine, especially the parts of the country through which Napoleon's army marched in February to June 1799. Jaquetin continued to work on these maps after he returned to France, and they were eventually published in 1826 and became widely known as their Jaquetin Atlas, labeling Palestine in French and Arabic as a Palestine or Holy Land / Land of Al-Quds. Also Katib 2003, Carmen 1960, 155 to 173, 244 to 253. This cartographer representation of Palestine by the French would also find strong echoes in the establishment and naming of the autonomous administrative province of Al-Quds, Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, by the Ottomans 50 years later, in 1872, CPP 259 to 260. Their Jaquetin map of Palestine, surveyed during Napoleon's campaign in 1799, was also later published by the Palestine Exploration Fund, Corner 1944. British colonial ambitions in late 19th century Palestine and the lack of detailed British military maps of the area were 2 of the key factors behind the formation of the British Palestine Exploration Fund and British Ordnance Survey of Western Palestine in the 1870s. As we shall see in Chapter 10, the Israeli toponymic projects in the post-1948 period had their foundations in the de-Arabization activities of James Finn and the biblical explorations in the 1870s by members of the Palestine Exploration Fund, whose work, names and places in the Old and New Testament and Apocrypha, with their modern identifications, compiled by George Armstrong, revised by Sir Charles W. Wilson and Major C. R. Conder 1889, was central to British colonial toponymic projects in Palestine in the late 19th and first half of the 20th century. The systematic mapping, surveying and place naming projects, which reached their peak with the British Ordnance Survey of Western Palestine between 1871 and 1877, were largely strategic. The sacredness of Palestine was not a sufficiently convincing reason for the British to organize and finance such surveys. The main motive for mapping the country as a whole was its strategic and geopolitical importance for the British Empire, which was then engaged in international struggles over the Middle East. Gorin 2002, 87 to 110. However, the surveys and mapping of the British Royal Engineering Corps in the 1870s led subsequently to the growth of proto-Jewish Zionism. The British Palestine Exploration Fund was founded in 1865 by a group of biblical scholars, scriptural geographers, military and intelligence officers and Protestant clergymen, most notably the Dean of Westminster Abbey, Arthur P. Stanley. Its scientific exploration was coordinated very closely with the British politico-military establishment and intelligence community anxious to penetrate Ottoman Palestine, a country ruled by the Muslim sick man of Europe. With offices in central London, the PEF today is an active organization which publishes an academic journal, the Palestine Exploration Quarterly. In addition, the PEF presents public lectures and funds research projects in the Near East. According to its website, Between 1867 and 1870, Captain Warren carried out the explorations in Palestine which form the basis for our knowledge of the topography of ancient Jerusalem and the archaeology of the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif Isik. In addition to his explorations on, under, and around the Temple Mount al-Haram al-Sharif, Warren surveyed the plain of Philistia and carried out a very important military reconnaissance of central Jordan. Point 7. Captain, later General Sir Charles Warren, 1840–1927, of the British Royal Engineers, one of the key officers of the PEF, who was sent to map the scriptural topography of Jerusalem and investigate the site of the temple. Noted British King Consul James Finn rules supreme, not over the natives of the city, but over strangers. But yet these strangers for the most part are the rightful owners, the natives, for the most part, are usurpers. Shepherd, 1987, 127–128. Both Warren and their above-mentioned, long-serving and famous British consul, Finn, who was a restorationist Christian Zionist involved with their mission to the Jews, Shepherd, 1987, 110, apparently literally burrowed beneath the Muslim shrines in Jerusalem to chart their original dimensions of their temple mount. The biblical archaeology and toponimic projects of Warren and the Royal Engineers have remained basic data for many Israeli archaeologists, geographers and strategic planners of today. Shepherd, 1987, 195, Benvenisti, 2002, 11–27. Following in the footsteps of the PEF, the British mandatory authorities in Palestine set out to gather toponymic information from the local Palestinian population. The British drive to present European colonialism as a continuation of an ancient Jewish ownership of the land meant that place names in Palestine became a site of fierce contest between the European Zionist settled colonizers and the indigenous Palestinians. Palestinian Arab names were, and continue to be, unnamed and Hebraicized by the Zionists using a colonizing strategy based on Old Testament names. Local Palestinian place names were deemed, redeemed, and liberated when they were rendered from Arabic into Hebrew. Slyamovich, 1998. 2002, their Genealogy of British Colonial Name Commissions and the Zionist Hebrew Renaming Project, which began in the 19th century, lingered under the British colonial system in Palestine, Al-Sheikh, 2010, and were accelerated dramatically after the Nakba and the expansion of biblical and archaeological departments at Israeli universities. Their historic and geographic maps of Palestine, the National Geographic, the long history and geography of Palestine, ancient, medieval and modern, are deeply ingrained in the social and cultural memory of Europe and the Arab world. In 1890, German historian Gustav Reinhold Rohricht, in Bibliotheca Geographica Palestine, listed 3,515 books issued in many languages between 333 AD and 1878 AD which dealt with the geography of Palestine. Rohricht's work also contains a chronological list of maps relating to Palestine. Preoccupation with the history, geography and cartography of Palestine was also evident in the publications of the National Geographic, formerly the National Geographic Magazine, the official magazine of the National Geographic Society, based in Washington, D.C. The NGS is one of the largest nonprofit scientific and educational institutions in the world. Its interests include geography, history, archaeology, and natural sciences. The National Geographic has been published continuously since its first issue in 1888. The archives of the magazine show a huge focus on the cartography, history, and archaeology of historic Palestine, ancient and modern. The historic Palestine maps, no mention of maps of Canaan, of the National Geographic, not known to be particularly pro-Palestinian, produced the following titles: Impressions of Palestine, the 1st of March 1915, former British ambassador to the US, James Bryce, relates his impressions of a predominantly Muslim Palestine, Jerusalem's locust plague, being a description of the recent locust influx into Palestine, and comparing same with ancient locust invasions as narrated in the Old World's History book, the Bible, the 1st of December 1915, John D. Whiting compares the recent invasion of locusts in Palestine and Syria with the ancient locust plagues described in the Bible among the Bethlehem shepherds, a visit to the valley which David probably recalled when he wrote the 23rd Psalm. The 1st of December 1926, shepherd families of Palestine live much as their ancestors did. Often the youngest boy tends the sheep, with flute and staff in hand, changing Palestine. The 1st of April 1934, improved transportation and communication give Palestine growing room as the small but strategic land continues its role as a meeting place for East and West bombs over Bible lands. The 1st of August 1941, in Syria, Palestine, and Iraq, where Romans, Babylonians, and Assyrians once battled, Germany and Russia vie for control of the oil-rich nations, disrupting historic lands with bombs, planes, and tanks. Palestine today, the 1st of October 1946, under the control of Great Britain, Palestine struggles to cope with immigration. Growing cities and farms make a strange mix in the ancient land. An archaeologist looks at Palestine. The 1st of December 1947, the author encounters history at every turn, in an ancient land that has been a cockpit of unending conflict for many centuries. Paradigm shift in late Ottoman Palestine, 1872-1917. Historical continuities and administrative division of Palestine. Abdul Karim Rafik, a distinguished Syrian historian who pioneered the use of Sharia, Islamic law, court records, sigillat, as sources for social and especially urban history, and wrote extensively on Ottoman Syria and Palestine, came across the Arabic term Palestine on a number of occasions. Rafik 1990, Gerber 2008, 51. Among Rafik's Arabic sources for late 19th century Palestine was an 1879 Arabic manuscript by Damascene author Numan al-Qasatli, entitled Al-Roder al-Numanir in the Travelogue to Palestine and Some Syrian Towns. Rafik 1990, Gerber Rafik 1990 2008, 51. Which provides an 1870s survey of Palestine. This increase in the use of the Arabic terminology of Palestine and Palestine in the second half of the 19th century, and the growing perception, local, regional and international, that modern Palestine, Holy Land, was distinct, if not separate, from modern Syria, were among the multiple indicators of the paradigm shift in the perception of late Ottoman Palestine. However, with reference to the textual usage of the terms Palestine, Philistine and Palestine in indigenous, literary scholarly sources in Arabic, the context of the predominantly pre-modern oral culture of Palestine should always be kept in mind. Also, crucially, unlike the introduction of printing presses in Europe in the 15th century, which gradually led to mass literacy and mass publications, Palestine had its first printing presses 5 centuries later, in the late 19th century, and subsequently one famous printing press in Jaffa was called Palestine Pressers. Therefore, inevitably the volume of a literary scholarly output on Palestine in Arabic prior to the late 19th century, in comparison with the mountains of sources in European languages, was limited, for a host of reasons, top of which was the European powers' scramble for an actual penetration of Palestine, Holy Land. The perception of the importance of Palestine by the rulers of the shrinking Ottoman Empire began to change radically in the second half of the 19th century. This was a gradual process and was also reflected in Ottoman Turkish English dictionaries of the early and mid-19th century. The term Holy Land was often rendered into a Palestine. One such original dictionary was produced in 1856 by Sir James Redhouse, an English and Turkish dictionary, which was later used as the basis for many Turkish English dictionaries, translated the English term Holy Land into the Arabic script as Dar Palestine, or Land of Palestine. Redhouse 1856. 8. In Islamic terminology, with which both Redhouse and Ottoman officials were familiar, the Arabic singular form dar may mean house, place, land, country, region, or territory. This dictionary was commissioned by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, the largest and most important American missionary organization in the 19th century. The board started a new mission to Palestine in 1819, but Redhouse himself had worked for the Ottoman government for many years, first as a draftsman in the late 1820s before he returned to England in 1834 to publish his first Ottoman English dictionary. In 1838, Redhouse returned to Istanbul to work for the Ottoman government as an interpreter to the Vizier-i-Azam, effectively Prime Minister, and the Minister for Foreign Affairs. In 1840, Redhouse was transferred to the Ottoman Admiralty and became a member of the Ottoman Naval Council. In this capacity, he went to Syria-Palestine to help with communications between the British and Ottoman fleets, which at the time were blockading the Egyptian forces in the Levant under the command of Ibrahim Pasha. After the end of Egyptian rule in Palestine and Syria in 1841, Redhouse received the Sultan's Imperial Order Iftar Nasrani in 1941, one of the chivalric orders of the Ottoman Empire. He remained in Istanbul until 1853 before returning to London to work for the British Foreign Office. Another key indicator of the shift in the perception of the country of Palestine, Holy Land, was the Ottoman administrative reorganization in Palestine reforms, which were partly instituted under growing pressure from the European allies who had backed the Ottoman Empire in its struggle against the Egyptian occupation of the Levant in 1831-1840 and during the Ottoman-Russian Crimean War of 1853-1858. The sick man of Europe was also increasingly falling under the financial control of the European powers, whose penetration of Holy Land, Palestine, was unstoppable. Eyalets, provinces or pashaliks, were primary administrative divisions of the Ottoman Empire, a division which lasted from the mid-15th century until the 1860s, and were headed by senior officials known as valis, or general governor. In 1859, in a Gazetteer of the World, or Dictionary of Geographical Knowledge, Volume 1, a member of the British Royal Geographic Society described Acre as a pashalik of the Ottoman Empire and a part of Palestine. In the 1860s, the greatly weakened Ottoman Empire replaced these eyalets with vilayets, Arabic, wilay. Both the eyalets and vilayets were subdivided into sanjaks or liwers. The sanjaks were divided into qardars, which in turn were divided into nahirs. In the early 1870s, the Ottomans also created a special administrative status for Jerusalem, together with 4 other sub-districts, called Mutasarrifiyya, Arabic, or Mutasarriflik, Ottoman Turkish, Busso 2011, 5, Arbuman 1999, 36. The administrative reforms of the 1860s and 1870s were introduced under the impact of growing European influence, and they followed the devastating Crimean War 1853-1856, which involved Russia, Britain, France and the weakened Ottoman Empire. The immediate cause of the war centered on the fierce struggle of European powers for Palestine and over their rights of Christian minorities in the Holy Land. Combined with a power struggle for the Holy Land and Jerusalem, these cataclysmic events propelled Palestine to center stage in both European and Ottoman thinking. The far-reaching Ottoman administrative changes of the 1860s and 1870s, combined with intense European rivalry over the Holy Land, not only produced administrative consequences for Palestine, but also contributed to a profound shift in the way Palestine was perceived, reconfigured and experienced in the late Ottoman period. The shift began with a change in the perception and reconceptualization of Palestine in the course the late Ottoman period, Tamari 2011, and was embodied in the administrative and territorial reorganization of the country, inspired by the creation of the independent administrative Mutasarrifate of Mount Lebanon in 1861, the autonomous Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, Kudüs-i Serif Mutasafal, was established in 1872 and given the special administrative status of Mutasafal or Mutasarriflik. The shift in the perception of Palestine was partly reflected in the scale of the new Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem. To begin with, it was at least 5 times bigger than the Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre put together. This very large Mutasarrifate was never intended to be a Sanjak, but rather a kind of super Sanjak, practically a wilay, an independent province completely separate and remarkably distinct from the historic Ottoman administrative divisions of Ul-Sham. Also, the political status of the Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem was unique in another respect. It came under the direct authority of Istanbul, Busso 2011, Khalidi, are 1997, 174. Crucially, these radical and far-reaching administrative reorganizations in Palestine were carried out with the consent or active support of their influential local Palestinian elites. Foster 2016a. No local Palestinian opposition to administratively separating Jerusalem and much of Palestine from the Ul-Sham region was recorded. The Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem consisted of, in addition to the District of Jerusalem, for other large districts, Carter's Jaffa, Gaza, Al-Khalil, Hebron, and Beersheba. With its huge size, this made it effectively a new province, at the center of which was the holy city of Jerusalem. The latter for many centuries had been central to Provincia Palestina, Byzantine Palestina Primer, and the Arab province of Jund Falastin. It became the provincial capital of the Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, a new province which was often conflated or equated with the Palestine. In 1911-1912, the governor of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, Sevda Bey, wrote a letter to the popular Jaffa-based newspaper Palestine, calling himself their governor of Palestine. Foster 2016b. Also Kushner 1987. In 1872, the Ottomans also created the administrative sanjaks of Nablus and Acre, both of which, together of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, formed the territorial basis of Mandatory Palestine in 1917-18. However, historians failed to recognize that both the historical roots of Mandatory Palestine and the territorial basis of the Sanjak of Acre go back to the 18th century, and to the fact that the province, Pashalik, of Acre was not a traditional province created by the Ottoman authorities. The province of Acre was a modern creation of the mid-18th century. It was effectively imposed on the Ottoman Empire by Dahir ul-Umar, who militarily defeated the Ottoman army, occupied Acre in 1749 and made it the capital of his Galilee-based emirate. The latter, in effect, had replaced the old Ottoman administrative province of Sidon. In fact, the weak Ottoman authorities were subsequently forced to recognize Umar's regime in large parts of Palestine, and he was officially granted by them the title of a Sheikh of Acre, Emir of Nazareth, Tiberias, Safed, and Sheikh of all Galilee. Philip 2015. After Umar's death, Ahmed Pasha al-Jazir, now officially recognized as the governor of the Pashalik of Acre, continued to rule as Umar from the same capital, Acre, from 1776 until his death in 1804. This modern regional, administrative and power legacy of the 18th century persisted well into the 19th century and formed the basis of the Sanjak of Acre, while the Ottomans, with the support of local Palestinian elites, sought to send a clear message by creating an important administrative distinction between Sanjak, Acre and Nablus, and Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem. Some otherwise perceptive authors continued to refer, rather inaccurately, to the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem as their Sanjak of Jerusalem. Arberman 1999. Clearly, the naming, size and status of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem meant that it was consciously conceived as a super Sanjak, with a particularly eminent status. Ottoman administrative reorganization of Palestine in the 1870s also provides us with some clues as to the unmistakable links between their politics and economy of 18th century Palestine and that of evolving late Ottoman Palestine. Acre and Nablus were Palestine's most powerful trade and manufacturing centers throughout most of the 18th and 19th centuries, and both were central to Palestine's and Ul-Sham's global trade in cotton and textiles. Also, crucially, Acre had been the capital of two practically independent Palestine-based regimes, those of Dahir ul-Umar and Ahmed Pasha al-Jazir, for almost half a century from 1746 to 1804. Also, interestingly, when the two Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre were established, they were initially placed under the political authority of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, rather than that of Damascus, Ul-Sham. This suggests the beginning of a new conceptualization of Palestine based on the idea of a unified Holy Land, an idea which began to shape European thinking in the 19th century, and a discourse with which both Ottoman officials in Palestine and local Palestinian elites were acutely aware, subject to direct rule from an Istanbul-appointed Mutasarrif. The Mutasarrifate and the two Sanjaks of Acre and Nablus were commonly referred to locally and internationally as Palestine. Images and perceptions are always very powerful, and the new South-North division of Palestine, Holy Land, inadvertently echoed historic South-Month divisions of the country under both the Byzantines, with originally Palestina Primer and Palestina Secundar, and early Islam, Jund Falastin and Jund ul-Urdun. Paradoxically, however, although the Sanjaks of Acre and Nablus were soon to be attached to the Wilay of Beirut, mainly in order to counter persistent Western intervention in the Holy Land, Palestine, the creation of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, as well as the two Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre, were perceived and actually referred to by the British consul in Jerusalem as the creation of a Palestine into a separate eyalet. 9. Arbuman 1999-39. The boundaries of this distinct Palestine eyalet, or unified Holy Land, were, by and large, the territory which became known as Mandatory Palestine, Foster 2016b. Officially, the Ottoman authorities, deeply concerned about European interference in their Holy Land, sought to confine the geographic term Falastin to the Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, and a 1913 Ottoman geography textbook, Mekatibai Ibtidai, Jurafi-i Osmani, Matba'i Amir, 1332 in 1913-1914, page 193, had a map showing the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem equated with Palestine. Point 10. However, the combination of the Sanjaks of Acre and Nablus with the province or Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem produced a radically different perception of Palestine, Holy Land, and the combination of their 3-in-1 administrative districts was referred to in the register of the Islamic Sharia Court of Jerusalem as Eyalet ul-Quds, their province of Jerusalem, Arbuman 1999. 43. Historical continuities in the geographic division of Palestine should be kept in mind. The three-way division of Ottoman Palestine from south, Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, to north, the Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre respectively, echoes previous divisions of the country under both early Islam, Jund Falastin and Jund ul-Urdun, and the Byzantines, Palestina Primer, Palestina Secundar and Palestina Salutaris, Rosen Ireland 2006, 15. Of course, perceptions are very powerful, and with historical hindsight this perception of late Ottoman Palestine, Holy Land, as a 3-in-1, 1 Mutasarriflik and 2 Sanjaks in 1 eyalet, centered on Jerusalem and led by the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, is not entirely unjustified or historically unprecedented. Historically, we have already seen this 3-in-1 representation of Provincia Palestina under the Byzantines in late antiquity, during which period the notion of the Holy Land also emerged and was consolidated. Of course, their 3 Sanjaks are equivalent to their 3 Palestines, Palestina Primer, Palestina Secundar, Palestina Tertia. They are based on the creative analogy of a 3-in-1. The Ottomans were themselves direct heirs to Byzantium and would have been aware of Byzantine and Arab histories of the Near East and Palestine. After all, the autocephalous and independent, all-Palestine Orthodox Church, based on the Church of Jerusalem, operated for centuries under the Ottomans, and its patriarchs were officially approved by the Ottoman government. But from British imperial or colonial perspectives, we can also see their 3-in-1 analogy in the way modern Iraq was constituted by the British after the First World War and constructed from the 3 Ottoman provinces of Baghdad, Basra and Mosul, with the capital Baghdad providing the focal point for modern Iraq, as well as their historical reference to the great Muslim capital under the Abbasids. In the case of Palestine, for the British, as well as for all European powers in the 19th century, Jerusalem provided the historical reference and focal point for the modern conception of Palestine. 6 important and closely related developments in the second half of the 19th and early 20th centuries contributed towards their unifying factors of a 3-in-1 Palestine eyalet. These Palestine Holy Land developments deeply affected the Ottoman reorganization and actual administration of Palestine. These developments were large-scale pilgrimage and mass tourism in Palestine, the construction of new road systems to accommodate the influx of Christian pilgrims, the establishment of Palestine Holy Land missions, both diplomatic and ecclesiastical. The new Palestine Holy Land photography produced mountains of images and played a unifying factor. Holy Land knowledge production, scriptural mapping, ordnance surveys and archaeological excavations. Palestine archaeology and famous archaeological discoveries related to the extent and splendor of Byzantine Palestina, such as the Matabar mosaic floor map, discovered in 1884. The town of Nazareth became very important at the end of the 19th century as the first modern carriage roads were built to serve the influx of Christian pilgrims, and the main road was constructed in Lower Galilee to connect the Christian holy places of Nazareth, Carver Conner and Tiberias, Carmen 1960. 251. The influx of Christian pilgrims and European tourists to Palestine linked the Galilee very closely with the rest of Palestine, and this can be seen in the construction of 7 European-style clock towers at the heart of the public spaces of key cities of late Ottoman Palestine: Jaffa, Haifa, Acre, Nazareth, Safed, Al-Quds and Nablus, built between 1900 and 1903 at local initiatives and from stones quarried in Palestine. Designed to commemorate the silver jubilee of the reign of the Ottoman Sultan, Abd al-Hamid II, the clock towers served as new symbols of modern timekeeping and modernity, with the exception of the clock tower of Al-Quds, which was blown up by the British in 1922. These clock towers have remained key landmarks of Palestinian modernity. The impact of the industrial-scale pilgrimage and modern mass tourism on the administration of late Palestine can hardly be overstated. Consequently, and perhaps not surprisingly, in 1906 the 2 districts of Nazareth and Tiberias in the Galilee were attached to the Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, mainly in order to accommodate the new mass pilgrimage and tourism from Russia, Europe and the US, and facilitate the issuance of a single tourist visa to Christian pilgrims and travelers in Palestine. Bussau 2011, 70, Cork 1994, 131. Not only had they reinforced the links between, and a unity of, the Christian holy sites of Jerusalem and those of the Galilee, Nazareth and Tiberias included, they also began to have a major impact on the political economy and the new geographical perceptions of the country, perceptions, as we shall see below, shared by European and Ottoman officials in Palestine as well as local Palestinians. Of course, throughout the second half of the 19th century, Ottoman officials in Palestine were determined to resist European intervention in the Holy Land, while making concessions to European powers either under intense pressures or due to shifting Ottoman alliances with European powers. From the perspective of the changes in late Ottoman Palestine, the perception of the Ottoman administrative rearrangement of Palestine as a 3-in-1 province, consisting of 2 administrative sanjaks and mutasarriflik and centered on the mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, evidently had a major impact on British imperial thinking during the First World War, but especially after 1918. For instance, in 1921 the first British High Commissioner for Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel, established the Supreme Muslim Council, which consisted of a president and 4 members, 2 of whom were to represent the former Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem and the remaining 2 to represent the former Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre. These 2 Sanjaks and 1 Mutasarriflik corresponded to the 3 administrative districts of late Ottoman Palestine. Dumper 1994. Central to the paradigm shift in late Ottoman Palestine was the perception throughout the late 19th century that the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem, together with the Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre, unified historic Palestine, or the Holy Land, into a distinct country. This was not confined to European and Palestinian authors. Politically and strategically, this conception was also evident from an important Ottoman document, Falastin Risalisi, a military handbook issued for limited distribution to the officers of the 8th Army Corps in Palestine at the beginning of the First World War. A demographic and geographic survey of the Palestine province, the manual included topographic maps, statistical tables, and a geoethnography of Palestine. It also contained a general map of the country in which the boundaries of Palestine extended far beyond the frontiers of the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem. In 1872, the boundaries of this Mutasarriflik, with its 5 districts, Carders of Jerusalem, Jaffa, Gaza, Beersheba and Al-Khalil, had analogies to both the Byzantine delineation of Palestina Primer and the early Arab Islamic delineation of Junt Falastin. The northern borders of the Falastin Risalisi map included the Litani River and the city of Tyre. The map encompassed all of the Galilee and parts of southern Lebanon, as well as the Sanjaks of Nablus and Acre. Tamari 2011. The reimagining of Palestinian territorial identity and proto-nationalism in late Ottoman Palestine, Kulal Baydas, and Palestinian cultural nationalism. Palestinian territorial nationalism, like the idea of Palestine, has multiple beginnings and multiple sources. In Palestinian Identity, the Construction of Modern National Consciousness, 1998, Rashid Khalidi argues that a distinct Palestinian national identity grounded in the land of Palestine emerged in the early 20th century. But, at the same time, Khalidi and several prominent historians of modern Palestine, including Bashara Doumani, 1995, Elon Papp, 1999, Baruch Kimmeling and Joel S. Migdal, 1993, 2003, all suggested that before the appearance of political Zionism in the late 19th century, a local Palestinian national identity had been in the making. Papp, 1999, 3. This nascent positive Palestinian national territorial identity in late Ottoman Palestine was not connected to Zionism. However, although an incipient local Palestinian national movement preceded the advent of Zionism in Palestine, this movement was also spurred on by Zionist settlement and land purchasing activities in the period prior to the First World War. In late Ottoman Palestine, the population of the three Palestinian administrative districts, Jerusalem, Nablus and Acre, was overwhelmingly Muslim and Christian Arab. The Jewish minority numbered about 25,000. The majority was deeply religious and urban-based. Until the advent of European Zionism in the late 19th century, relations among the Palestinians, Arabic-speaking Muslims, Christians and Jews, were peaceful and stable, forged by centuries of coexistence, shared history and shared country. Khalidi, W. 1984. The Memoirs of Wasif Jaharieh, 1897–1972, a Palestinian Christian citizen of Jerusalem. The Diaries of Wasif Jaharieh provide compelling testimony to the emergence of a two-tier Palestinian Ottoman territorial identity in late Ottoman Palestine and for the coexistence, cultural diversity and intermixing of Ottoman Jerusalem, a microcosm of late Ottoman modernity in Palestine. In the Palestinian world of Jaharieh's youth, boundaries separating the lives of Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Muslims were fluid. Jerusalem's modernity was a feature of internal dynamics in the Ottoman city, and I propose that the social structure of the walled city was much more fluid than generally believed. Further, I suggest that the quarter system signaling the division of the old city into confessional bounded domains was introduced and imposed retroactively on the city by British colonial regulations. Tamari, 2006, 28. In Palestine, the printing and publication revolution began in the late Ottoman period and developed on an industrial scale in the first half of the 20th century. This revolution was accompanied by the introduction of modern technologies, the growth in secular education and literacy, and rapid urbanization. Within a short period, and by 1948, more than one-third of Palestinian Arab society was urban-based. Together with the sharp rise in modern secular schools in the country, increased literacy broke the monopoly of the small, religiously minded, literate elites in the cities on education and learning and bolstered the emerging middle and professional classes in the cities. The increasing cultural self-awareness of educated people led to the rise of secular proto-nationalism in late Ottoman Palestine. Embryonic Palestinian cultural nationalism and territorial patriotism preceded Palestinian political nationalism, and this was fostered in schools and teacher training seminaries in late Ottoman Palestine. In the second half of the 19th century, the bilingual Russian Orthodox schools and teacher training centers in Palestine played an important role in promoting cultural renaissance in the country. These schools subsequently came to be among the best in the country, contributing to this national cultural awakening. The works of Khalil Ibrahim Baydas, Ruhi ul-Khalidi and Khalil ul-Sarkakini were the high end of the educational, cultural and literary revolution of late Ottoman Palestine, a modernist civic revolution which was dedicated to self-enlightenment, self-improvement, social empowerment and politically speaking self-representation, equal citizenship and regional autonomy within the Ottoman state. An intellectual and cultural pioneer, Baydas, 1874–1949, was a Palestinian Christian scholar, educator, novelist and prolific translator of Russian literary works. Born in Nazareth, in the Galilee, in 1874, Baydas was educated in Russian-funded bilingual Orthodox schools in the Galilee and studied at the highly regarded Russian teacher training seminary in Nazareth, 11, which was founded by the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society in 1886, and later housed in a building which became famously known to Palestinians throughout the Galilee as Olmaskubayir, the Moscovite compound. Other Russian compounds created in Palestine, including in Jerusalem and Okolil, Hebron, are still referred to by local Palestinians as Olmaskubayir. The most famous building constructed by the Society in Palestine was the Church of Mary Magdalene, on Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, built in 1886. Initially headquartered in Nazareth, between 1882 and 1884, the Society opened 4 schools in the Galilee and employed Orthodox Arab and Russian teachers and Arabic translators to translate school material from Russian to Arabic. By 1899, the Society had 23 modern Maskub schools in Palestine and 2 teacher training seminaries, including one for women in Beit Jailer, which opened in 1890. Villages and towns were asked to provide the buildings, but all books, notebooks, pens and pencils, equipment, sport facilities, administration and teaching were free of charge. 12 Most schools were also co-educational, which added another dimension to the educational revolution introduced by the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society. Soon after its arrival in Palestine in the early 1880s, the Arabic rendition of the Russian name, Russian Orthodox Palestine Society, would have been taught in all Russian Orthodox schools in Palestine, as Arabic was the instruction language while Russian was compulsory. Other languages such as French, Turkish and Greek were voluntary. After 1889, the Arabic rendition of the Russian name became the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society. This Arabic version of the Society's name would have been used not only by Beidas throughout his primary and secondary schooling in Nazareth in the early 1890s, but has also continued to be used in publications by Palestinian Orthodox Christians for more than 135 years. 13 Not only that, eventually on the 1st of April 1902, after a period of negotiations between the Russian leaders of the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society and the Ottoman authorities, they recognized all 37 schools and seminaries of the Society, the majority of which were in Palestine, with some in Syria and Lebanon, and the occasion was marked by public celebrations in Palestine, Syria and Russia. 14 The impact of this important official Ottoman recognition of the activities of the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society extended beyond education into the encouragement of Russian mass pilgrimage to Palestine, which was also organized by the same society. In the early 20th century, Russian pilgrims constituted nearly 80% of all foreign Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land. As we shall see below, this Russian mass pilgrimage forced the Ottoman authorities to make further administrative adjustments, and in 1906 the districts of Nazareth and Tiberias were added to the Mutasarrifate of Noble Jerusalem, mainly to accommodate the new mass pilgrimage from Russia and the West in facilitating the issuance of a single tourist visa to Christian pilgrims and travelers in Palestine. Beidas was a product of the educational and intellectual awakening of late Ottoman Palestine. He was also utilizing local and imperial resources, such as those made available by the Russian Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society, to articulate a new sense of modern Palestinian identity. Indeed, many of Beidas' ideas were also radical and even revolutionary by the standards of late Ottoman Palestine. After graduating from the teacher training seminary in Nazareth, Beidas moved to Jerusalem, then the Palestinian intellectual and cultural capital of late Ottoman Palestine. He worked as a senior Arabic teacher at the Anglican St. George's School in Jerusalem and as a translator from Russian to Arabic for the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society. He also traveled in Russia in 1892. Beidas' exceptional linguistic and cultural talents and translations from Russian into Arabic were influenced by the works of leading Russian novelists and poets, including Alexander Pushkin, Nikolai Gogol, Dostoevsky, Leon Tolstoy and Maxim Gorky. Some of these authors had developed radical critiques of autocracy, popular approaches to history, identification with the lives of ordinary people, and emphasis on freedom and social justice. Tolstoy had an idealistic view of the Russian countryside and Russian peasantry, and this had an impact on Beidas' positive views of the Palestinian countryside and peasantry. Beidas had already translated into Arabic and published in Beirut in 1898 Pushkin's historical novel The Captain's Daughter. Beidas' weekly periodical, Ol Nafeas Ol, Azria, Modern Gems, was founded 10 years later in 1908 in Haifa, and it began by serializing the Russian classic novels Beidas was translating. Beidas is considered to be the pioneer of the Palestinian short story, Raid ul-Kisr ul-Filistinier, Moza 2015, 188, and in 1909 he published The Conditions of Tyranny, Awal ul-Istibdad, one of the earliest critical accounts of tyrannical rule to appear in the Arabic language. Edward Said, a close relative of Beidas, astutely observed that Beidar's essays, short stories, historical novels and works of translation in the pre- and post-war periods played an important role in the construction of early modern Palestinian national identity. Moore Gilbert 2009, 182. The Great Flowering of Palestinian and Arab Literature and Poetry, of novel translations, journalism, educational experiments and private library collections during the late Ottoman period created a living memory of the period in Palestine, one much stronger in living Arab culture than that of the medieval Al-Andalus period. For example, Beidar's own personal Jerusalem library of more than 6,000 books was plundered, together with other Palestinian private libraries owned by Khalil Sarkakini and other Palestinian Jerusalemites, by the Israelis during the 1948 Nakba, and the episode was documented in the Great Book Robbery. 15 Beidar's and other Palestinian library collections can shed a great deal of light on the Palestinian intellectual renaissance and national consciousness in the late Ottoman period. An illustration of this new consciousness is found in the 1898 geographic preface to Beidar's translation of Akim Alexeyevich Olesnitsky's A Description of the Holy Land, Volume 1, also Foster 2016c. The original version appeared in Russian in 187516 by the Imperial Russian Orthodox Palestine Society. Beidas describes this as a publication of the Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society. Beidas also talks about the inadequate geographical works available in Arabic on his country, Palestine, and about the indigenous sons and daughters of Palestine, Abnar Falastin, and their need for an extensive geographic work on their country. Writing to local Palestinian audiences, Beidas knew that many Palestinians would be closely familiar with the indigenous connotations of the term. Beidas describes Olesnitsky's work as follows: an extensive book which describes the country of Palestine with its places, rivers, lakes, mountains and valleys. He also talks about his use of idiomatic Arabic and his choice of the simple expression which is closely related to our minds. Beidar's work and activities present a landmark in the emergence of modern Palestinian nationalism for a variety of reasons. 9 factors distinguish the scholarly, cultural and geographic contribution of Beidas to the modern notion of Palestine and the emergence of new territorial national consciousness in late 19th century Palestine. Beidas, a native of the Galilee, was working from a modern wider concept of Palestine, and not just from medieval Arab Islamic social memory associated with the historic province of Jund Falastin. Beidas uses the terms Palestinian and Palestine simultaneously and interchangeably, which is a hallmark of modern Palestinian writing. The 2-page preface begins with the Arabic expression Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah, the Arabic word for God, an expression frequently invoked by Muslims due to its centrality to the first chapter of the Quran and the name and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. This expression is also used by Arabic-speaking Christians, but the implication is that work is aimed at all Arabic-speaking Palestinians. The complete absence of any reference to Zionism in contrast with Palestinian national writings a decade later, the most famous examples of which are the newspaper Palestine, 1911, and the writings of Ruhi al-Khalidi, 1913, see below, and this points to the emergence of a two-tier Palestinian Ottoman identity and the beginnings of the Palestinian cultural renaissance in late Ottoman Palestine, a renaissance which preceded the subsequent national preoccupation with Zionism. The ease with which Beidas uses the terms Palestine and our country and their Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society, without the need to define or explain these terms or introduce this society. This suggests 2 things. 1. Beidas thought that his Arab readers would be familiar with these terms and have a full understanding of what he meant. 2. These terms and this Arabic name of the society were already commonly used and understood. The Palestinian Orthodox Imperial Society ran a translation and publishing house in Jerusalem, and after 1889 it operated in Palestine throughout the 1890s under the Arabic name, the name Beidas uses in his 1898 preface. This late 19th century modern geographic, territorial concept of Palestine advanced by someone educated in the modern schools of Galilee departed from the traditional regional Islamic concept of Palestine, described or referred to by the Muslim scholars al-Maqdisi, Muhir al-Din, Khair al-Din al-Ramli and Saleh ibn Ahmed al-Mutashian in the 10th, 15th and 17th centuries respectively. The conception of Palestine understood by these for Muslim writers and Qardis was derived from the medieval Muslim province of Junt Falastin, whose capital was Al-Ramla, but whose territory did not include the Galilee. Historically, names of distinguished individuals before and under Islam in Palestine were augmented by adding town names to individual names. Examples of prominent or distinguished Palestinians discussed above included Antiochus of Ascalon in 2nd century BC Philistia, Jesus of Nazareth in the 1st century AD, Eusebius of Caesarea Maritima in 4th century Palestina Prima, Procopius of Caesarea Maritima in 6th century Palestina Prima, al-Maqdisi of Al-Quds, the Jerusalemite, in the 10th century province of Falastin, Muhammad al-Yuzuri, Muhammad Hassan ibn Ali al-Yuzuri, from Yazir, a town east of Jaffa in the Fatimid province of Junt Falastin, also vizier of the Fatimid state from 1050 to 1058. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, 1372 to 1449, a leading medieval Shafi'i Sunni scholar whose family originated in Ascalon, Mamluk, Palestine. Khair al-Din al-Ramli of Al-Ramla in 17th century Ottoman Palestine. On a popular Palestinian level, individual names were also linked to their hometowns, such as Ibn Akar, son of Acre, or after their clan, for example, Dahar Umar al-Zaydani of the Zaydani clan. The traditional forms of identification, whether Jesus of Nazareth or Julian of Norwich, c. 1342 c. 1416, were common throughout the world. In his 1898 preface, the Galilee-born Beidas talks about their sons of Palestine, a generic term for their people of Palestine. This distinct territorial form of identification in the late 19th century is a radical departure from all other traditional forms of identification. In the 20th century, the traditional forms of identification did not disappear completely, but they were augmented by this new form of territorial identification and patriotic consciousness, their Sons of Palestine. In the early decades of the 20th century, the collective Sons of Palestine also became